They told us it would be a short push. Get in, secure the hill, and hold until reinforcements arrived. That's what the briefing said anyway. But they never mentioned how cold the mud would feel when it soaked through your boots for days. They never warned us that the trees themselves would turn against us, flinging razor-sharp splinters faster than a bullet every time an artillery round cracked the sky. No one said a damn thing about the sound a man makes when he gets caught in a bouncing Betty. It's not a scream. It's a gurgle, like something boiling over and breaking apart at the same time. The first time I saw the hill, it didn't look like much. Just a rise in the tree line, hidden behind layers of fog and rain. Height 493. A number. That's all it was. Until we started climbing it. That's when the name started to feel like a sentence. Like we were being sent somewhere to disappear. And maybe that's exactly what it was. We were just another file in someone's cabinet back in headquarters. A row of dog tags waiting to be collected. Our platoon, Charlie Company, had been marching for what felt like a lifetime through the Hürtgen Forest. Thick, endless trees, rain that never stopped, and mud that swallowed boots like quicksand. You could hear the distant popping of rifles, sometimes closer, sometimes fading. But the worst was the silence. That heavy, pressing silence that settled like fog, waiting to be shattered by something worse. Private Lennox was the first to go. He tripped a wire near a fallen oak. The mine didn't just kill him. It scattered pieces of him across a 10-foot radius. And it wasn't like in the movies. There was no time to mourn, no cinematic pause for emotion. We just kept moving, tighter now, watching every step like we were walking on glass. That's when the forest started to change for me. It wasn't just a place anymore. It became something alive, angry, watching. I remember Captain Donnelly's voice cracking over the radio. He never sounded like that before. Usually sharp, always sure. But that day, there was panic in it. Something had gone wrong with Baker Company up ahead. Ambushed, wiped out mostly. Survivors were bleeding out behind tree stumps and tangled brush. No way to reach them. Donnelly called it a meat grinder. I called it suicide. But orders came down fast. We were to advance, flank from the west, and take the hill. I could already feel the cold grip of it in my gut. That night, we set up a temporary bivouac near a ravine. No fires, no talking, just the rustle of wet canvas and the occasional cough. I shared a foxhole with Private Torres, kid from Albuquerque, barely 19. He kept fingering this tiny silver cross he wore around his neck. Said his mama gave it to him before he shipped out. I wanted to tell him that it wouldn't help him here. Not in this place. Not in this cursed forest. But I didn't. He needed that hope more than I needed to tear it down. Around 0300, we started the climb. The fog was so thick it felt like trying to breathe through a wet blanket. Our boots sank with every step. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. Then came the whistling. Mortars. We dove. Not all of us fast enough. I heard Private Mendel scream as a tree burst into shrapnel near him. The explosion lit up the woods for just a second. Long enough to see what was left of him. That second burned into my memory like a photograph from hell. There was no formation anymore. Just movement. Crawling through wet underbrush, scrambling over roots, whispering to shadows. And the enemy? They weren't where they were supposed to be. No straight line, no trenches. They were everywhere and nowhere. Hidden in spider holes, behind rocks, in the trees. Their bullets didn't have patterns. They just came, short bursts, then silence. Wait, then again, over and over. Like the forest was breathing gunfire. By mid-morning, we were down 10 men. No medevac, no support. Just us, the mud, and the hill. And then something happened. We found a clearing, maybe 50 yards wide, surrounded by tall pines that leaned in as if trying to whisper secrets. There felt wrong. Still. Too still. I raised a fist, signaling halt. We crouched, weapons up. That's when I saw it. A shape? Not quite a man, not quite a shadow. Just a blur, standing motionless near the far edge. I blinked, and it was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Just vanished. Torres saw it too. His hand tightened around that cross until his knuckles went white. I don't know if it was the cold, the exhaustion, or something else, but the forest was starting to feel like it had a mind. Like it knew we were there. Like it was testing us, breaking us down piece by piece. And we were failing. Then the shooting started again. Not from the front, like we expected. From behind. Somehow they had looped us. Or maybe they were always there. We scrambled for cover, returning fire blindly. I watched McKay go down with a hole in his helmet. No time to drag him. No time to think. Just move, fire, breathe, repeat. Every second felt like a minute. Every minute felt like a year. And just when I thought we were done for, that this would be the end of Charlie Company, it stopped. Just like that. No more shots. No more movement. Just rain. Soft, steady, almost mocking. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Not a sound. We held our position in that clearing, counting ammo, whispering names, checking wounds. Torres sat beside me, eyes wide, breathing heavy. Then he asked me something that still haunts me. He said, "Sergeant, do you think the forest let some of us go, just so we could tell others not to come?" I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if we were still alive or if we were just walking ghosts, waiting for our turn. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I wasn't tired, hell, I hadn't truly rested in days, but because the kind of exhaustion we carried through that forest wasn't the kind that sleep could fix. It was bone deep, stitched into the soul like shrapnel, you never got removed. We stayed in that clearing till dawn, listening to the forest breathe, each crack of a branch or shuffle of wet leaves setting every nerve on edge. The silence after the firefight wasn't peace. It was the eye of the storm, and we all knew it. Torres eventually drifted into a half-sleep, clutching his rifle like a lifeline, that tiny silver cross still wrapped around his fingers like a promise made to a god who was probably on leave. I envied him for being able to drift, even if just for an hour. Me? I stared into the trees, wondering how many of our dead were still lying out there, soaked into the soil like ink on wet paper. As morning cracked through the dense canopy, it brought a gray light that didn't feel any different from night. We gathered what was left of our gear and made a slow push northeast toward the last known coordinates of the forward recon team. They hadn't reported in for nearly 24 hours. The brass called it a communication failure, but we all knew what it really meant. We were looking for bodies, not friends anymore. Just remains. The rain turned from mist to a light drizzle, soaking through our uniforms with casual cruelty. Everything smelled of wet bark, cordite, and something metallic, blood probably. There was no longer any difference between the stink of death and the stink of the earth. We moved in 2 columns, rifles up, stepping over roots like coiled snakes, every man's eyes darting like he was reading between the lines of a very bad story. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Words took energy, and energy was rationed like ammo. At one point, we came across an old German bunker, half collapsed into the hillside, moss growing over its entrance like it had tried to hide itself from the war. Inside, we found empty casings, a rusted helmet, a message scratched into the wall in broken English. "The trees are listening." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I believed it, but because deep down, I was beginning to think I did. About 100 yards past the bunker, we spotted the first body. It was Corporal Evans from Recon. What was left of him, anyway? He'd been strung up by his harness between 2 trees, suspended just above the ground like some grotesque warning sign. His chest had been opened by shrapnel or maybe a mine. It was hard to tell, but what shook me was the expression frozen on his face. Not pain, not fear, confusion, like he'd seen something he couldn't understand right before the end. We cut him down in silence. No ceremony, just the cold practicality of the living dealing with the dead. We left him wrapped in a tarp beside a tree with his dog tags looped around the outside. We'd come back for him, if we made it. As we pushed further into the woods, we started losing track of time. The trees were too thick for the sun to mark the sky properly, and the fog made it impossible to guess direction by feel. It was like the forest had erased all sense of orientation on purpose. Our compasses kept spinning strangely, and the maps were useless. The landmarks shifted or disappeared altogether. Even Captain Donnelly started to doubt the coordinates. The hill was supposed to be to our east, but every time we turned in that direction, we ended up back where we started. It was Torres who said it out loud first, in a half-whisper that barely carried. "What if the hill doesn't want to be found?" No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes, because in that moment we were all thinking the same thing. The terrain grew steeper and the mud deeper. At one point, Sergeant Muller stepped into a patch that nearly swallowed him whole. We had to link arms to pull him out, and when we finally did, he was pale and shaking, muttering something about hands grabbing his legs. We chalked it up to shock, but the way he looked at the ground after, like it had tried to eat him alive, stayed with me. Even I couldn't shake the feeling that this forest wasn't just passively dangerous. It was predatory. It lured you in, watched you, and when you were tired enough or lost enough or scared enough, it took what wanted. We lost Private Kindle just before dusk. He was walking rear guard, maybe 10 paces behind the rest of us. One minute he was there, boots crunching the gravel, rifle slung low. The next, gone. No sound, no shout, just vanished. We doubled back, spread out in a line, called his name in hushed voices that barely carried through the dense air. Nothing, not a trace, not even footprints, like the forest had just inhaled and taken him with it. We searched until dark, and even then, Torres refused to move. He stood still, turning in slow circles, whispering Kindle's name like if he said it enough, he could call him back. Eventually, I had to grab his shoulder and tell him we needed to go, that we'd come back. We never did. That night, we made camp at the base of what we hoped was Height 493. It rose out of the fog like a corpse's back, steep and slick with moss and rain. We couldn't see the top. We couldn't see much of anything. Just trees bending in unnatural ways and shadows that didn't seem to have sources. The forest was whispering again, but not with wind. There was no breeze, just movement in the leaves, a dry rustling like paper being crumpled slowly in the next room. We set up a perimeter. Didn't matter. Everyone knew it wouldn't stop anything if something wanted in. Around midnight, I saw it again, that same shape from the clearing. Only this time it was closer. It stood just beyond the ring of trees, no more than 30 feet away. No face, no features, just a tall gray blur that somehow had weight, like the air been around it. Blinked and it was gone. No movement, no footprints. But this time, I wasn't the only one who saw it. Muller and Simmons both looked at me, pale as ash. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. I lay awake the rest of the night, one eye on the trees, one hand on my rifle. And as the hours dragged by, a thought kept returning uninvited, like a splinter under the skin. What if we were already dead? What if this forest wasn't a battlefield, but a purgatory? And the hill? The hill was the test. When morning came, it wasn't with any sense of relief. The light filtered through the trees like it was afraid to fully enter, casting everything in a muted green haze that gave the forest a dreamlike, almost underwater quality. You'd think dawn would signal the stars something new. Maybe clarity, maybe hope, but in Hürtgen, the passing of time was meaningless. It only marked the hour when you started counting how many men you had left. We were down to 14 now. 14 out of the original 32. No rescue, no replacement. Just the living dragging their boots over moss and shell fragments, eyes glassy, too tired to be afraid but too aware to feel safe. We stood at the base of Height 493 with no orders, no path, and no illusions about what climbing it would mean. The hill itself wasn't the highest in the area, but it held the forest like a clenched fist. Every angle of its slope was guarded by twisted trees, overturned roots, and boulders blackened by artillery strikes that must have been weeks old. The ground had been fought over before, and the forest wore those scars like a warning. Craters gaped open like dry mouths, the soil inside churned to a black paste. Broken equipment lay scattered like bones, helmets without heads, rifles with cracked stocks, boots half buried, pointing in directions that made no sense. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't ended. It had simply paused, waiting for us to arrive. We began the climb in staggered groups, moving slowly, weapons at the ready, breath held like it was contraband. Each step upward felt heavier than the last, not just because of the incline, but because of the pressure in the air itself, thick, almost syrupy, as though the oxygen had forgotten how to fill your lungs properly. Even the trees leaned inward, their branches arching above us like ribs. It was a tunnel of sorts, a kind of gauntlet, and there was no telling what waited on the other side. I took point, as I often did, not because I wanted to, but because someone had to make the first bad decision. The path was barely visible, more of a series of muddy ledges than anything else, and I kept having to use roots and exposed rocks to pull myself up. Behind me, I could hear the others grunting, cursing under their breath, trying to stay quiet and failing. About a third of the way up, we hit our first real obstacle, a trench carved into the hillside like an open wound, partially collapsed but still visible. Old sandbags lined the rim, most of them rotted through, and it was filled with stagnant water that had turned black and oily. The smell was something between sulfur and rot, like death had fermented here. We moved along the trench's edge, staying low, scanning the tree line for movement. That's when we found the second recon team, or what was left of them. 3 bodies, stripped of gear, uniforms torn and discolored, flesh bloated from exposure and waterlogged beyond recognition. One of them still had his helmet on, and scrawled across the inside in chalk were the words, "Not the hill." Just that. Nothing else. No date, no initials. It didn't make sense. If this wasn't the hill, what the hell were we climbing? Simmons was the first to suggest turning back. He wasn't panicked. He was cold, calm, like a man who'd made peace with something inside himself and was just stating a fact. "We're not supposed to be here," he said. "Something ain't right. This place, it doesn't let you go." No one answered him, but I saw the agreement in their eyes. Not fear, not cowardice. Just understanding. We all knew it. We just didn't want to say it out loud, because once you name a curse, it starts to work faster. Still, we pushed forward. The trench ended in a steep embankment, and beyond that, the trees thinned slightly, just enough to let in more of that ghostly light. The air changed too. Colder, but somehow drier, as if the moisture had been pulled out of it. And that's when the wind started. Not a breeze, not a gust, just a low, constant current of air that moved in one direction, uphill, like something was drawing the forest's breath toward the summit. It didn't howl or whistle. It moaned, a long aching sound that slid through the trees and curled into your ears like a secret too painful to hear all at once. By midday, we reached a plateau, and for a moment I thought we'd made it to the top. The view should have confirmed that, but the fog was too thick to see beyond the immediate clearing. It was circular, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by broken trees and twisted roots that looked like skeletal arms reaching out from the earth. There were remnants of fighting here, spent shells, shattered crates, blood stains turned brown with age. And in the center of the clearing, half buried in the mud, was a German radio unit still humming faintly, as if powered by some dying ghost of a signal. Donnelly approached it, knelt beside the metal husk, and twisted the frequency dial. Static, then silence, then something else, a voice barely audible, speaking in English with a strange accent, repeating the same phrase over and over, "We are still inside. We are still inside." It played on a loop for nearly a full minute before the unit sparked and went dead, smoke curling up like incense. No one said a word. What could we have said? The air felt colder now, thinner. I watched the breath leave my mouth in clouds that seemed to linger just a little too long before vanishing. Torres looked at me with wide, empty eyes, and I knew right then that the boy had crossed a line he'd never come back from. Not fear. Something worse. That quiet detachment that creeps in when you stop believing in escape, when your world shrinks down to footsteps and shadows. The wind picked up, swirling the mist into patterns that danced across the clearing like half-formed shapes, almost human, but never quite. And then we heard the sound. A metallic clang, deep and rhythmic, like a bell being struck from inside the earth. Once, twice, then silence. Muller dropped to his knees, clutching his helmet as if trying to block out the noise, though it had already stopped. He whispered something I couldn't catch, but it sounded like a prayer, one I don't think he learned in any church. And just as the silence began to settle again, just as we started to believe maybe the worst had passed, a voice came from the trees. Not shouting, not angry, calm, familiar. It said, "Carter, you left me." We turned toward the sound, rifles raised, but the fog was too thick to see through. I took a step forward, my heart pounding, my mind racing. That voice, it sounded like Kindle. But Kindle was gone. We all knew that. Yet it was his tone, his cadence, his damn voice, calling my name like he was just around the corner. Then again, "You left me, Sergeant, and I did what I knew I shouldn't." I answered. I wish I could say I didn't move. I wish I could say I held the line, that training kicked in, that some iron-willed instinct kept my boots planted firmly where they should have stayed. But the truth is I stepped forward. It wasn't courage, not even close. It was something else, something quieter, darker. A need, not just to believe, but to see. I needed to prove that what I'd heard wasn't real, that it was just a trick of the fog, or some echo bouncing off the trees, or the beginning stages of what the docs back home called combat fatigue. But the forest didn't let me off the hook with logic. It tugged at something inside me, deep and raw, a thread that unraveled the longer I stood still. So I stepped into the mist. The trees swallowed me whole. Within seconds, I couldn't see the others behind me. The clearing was gone, the plateau vanished, and the trail underfoot had shifted. No longer a clear path, but a tangle of roots and mud that pulsed slightly with each step. Like the forest had a heartbeat I could feel through my boots. The air was heavy with that same strange pressure, like walking through water. Every breath I took felt filtered through something ancient. I heard twigs snap, some close, some distant, and occasionally a whisper just under the edge of comprehension, like voices caught between worlds. They didn't speak words exactly, just impressions. Regret, hunger, loneliness. Not mine. There's whoever they were. I don't know how long I walked. Minutes, hours, it all collapsed into a haze. But eventually, the fog shifted, thin just enough to reveal a figure standing among the trees ahead. Still, quiet, unmistakable. It looked like Private Kindle, down to the ragged edge of his jacket and the crooked bend in his right shoulder where he'd taken a fall outside Aachen. He was facing away from me, head tilted, unmoving. I should have known better. I should have turned around. But I didn't. I called his name, softly at first, then louder. No answer. Just silence thick enough to choke on. I took another step and the figure moved, slowly, mechanically, like a puppet remembering how to walk. When he turned toward me, his face was wrong. Not scarred or grotesque, not monstrous in any theatrical way. Just wrong. His eyes were too empty, his mouth slack like he'd forgotten how to smile, and the way he looked through me, not at me, made my stomach twist. Then he spoke again, the same words. "You left me." This time the voice came from behind me. I spun, rifle raised, heart hammering. No one there. When I turned back, the figure was gone. Only fog remained. And that's when I heard the gunfire. Not distant, not random. Controlled bursts, M1 Garens and bars, which meant the others were in contact, likely ambushed, pinned, or worse. I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, slipping in mud, branches slapping against my face like the forest itself wanted to hold me back. The sounds grew louder, shouts, explosions, the sharp thwack of bullets hitting bark and flesh. I burst through a thicket into a scene that didn't make any sense. My squad was spread out across a narrow ridge, half of them firing wildly into the trees, the other half crouched low behind natural cover, trying to regroup. It was chaos, but not like any firefight I'd seen. The enemy wasn't visible. There were no muzzle flashes, no return fire from German positions. It was as if the forest itself was the enemy. Shadows moved between trees too fast for the eye to catch, shapes that didn't fully form, glimpses of limbs that bent the wrong way, uniforms from the wrong war, faces you almost recognized before they vanished. I slid in beside Torres, who didn't even look up at me. His eyes were fixed forward, wide and glassy, and he just kept firing in short bursts. I grabbed his arm, shouted his name, but he wouldn't respond. Not until I shouted again, louder, almost angry. Then he turned and whispered, "They're wearing our faces." I didn't have time to ask what he meant. Behind us, Simmons screamed. Not from pain, but in fury, an animalistic roar that split through the noise of battle like a blade. He'd fixed his bayonet and charged into the fog, disappearing before anyone could stop him. A few shots followed, then nothing. No scream, no body, just silence. Donnelly tried to rally the men, ordering us to fall back, regroup, but was like commanding a tide. Everyone was disoriented, seeing things in the mist that shouldn't be there. Muller swore he saw his brother, killed in North Africa the previous year. Another man claimed he heard his mother calling from behind a tree. These weren't hallucinations in the usual sense. They weren't distant memories or tricks of the mind. They were present, tangible. The forest was showing us things that had no business being here. I tried to take control, tried to steady the line, but every moment we stayed on that ridge, it became clearer we weren't meant to hold ground. This wasn't a position to secure. It was bait, trap, and we'd walked right into it. One by one, the men began to fall, not to bullets, not even to wounds we could see. Some just collapsed, eyes wide, mouths open, as if whatever they'd seen had pulled the life straight out of them. Others wandered off, weapons lowered, as if following a sound only they could hear. I don't remember giving the order to retreat. I don't even know if I did. But somehow what remained of the squad began moving down the hill. Not in formation, not together, just away. Away from that place, from the ridge, from the voices. We didn't run. Running would have made us targets. We moved like sleepwalkers, through fog and fear, and the kind of silence that comes right before something ends. By nightfall, we found another hollow, this one deeper, surrounded by broken trees and quiet enough to feel real. I counted heads. Out of 32. Donnelly was gone. Simmons, Muller, the rest gone. Not killed. Not wounded. Just taken. Like the forest had simply claimed them. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Each man sat alone, staring at the ground, weapons forgotten, minds frayed to the edge. Torres held that silver cross tighter than ever, whispering prayers under his breath in a language I didn't know but understood anyway. Something old. Something desperate. And as I sat there, trying to figure out how to survive one more night in that cursed place, I realized something that chilled me deeper than the cold, deeper than any fear I'd known in the war. The hill wasn't the enemy. The enemy wasn't German. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way we understood life. Height 493 wasn't a place. It was a door. And we had opened it. That final night in the forest didn't feel like any night I'd known before. Not in Belgium, not in Normandy, not even during those early raids in Sicily, where sleep came in the form of exhaustion and dreams were just echoes of gunfire and missed meals. No, this night was different. The darkness didn't settle on the forest. It breathed through it, like the trees themselves were exhaling some ancient sorrow into the air around us. Even the stars refused to shine above the canopy, and what little moonlight made it through came distorted, bent by the mist, as though the very laws of nature were warped on this hill. We didn't light a fire. We didn't talk. We simply sat, scattered in the gnarled roots of the woods like forgotten relics of a different time. The 8 of us who remained formed no circle, no defense perimeter. We weren't soldiers that night. We were relics, artifacts of a war that no longer made sense. I stared at my boots until they disappeared into the dark, my thoughts turning inward, slow and strange, as if something inside me had been unspooling all along and I was only now aware of it. The forest had a rhythm. I could hear it, faint but unmistakable, like a pulse that beat beneath the roots and hummed just below the wind. It wasn't musical. It was mechanical, old, precise, and different. This hill had seen men die before. Countless times, over centuries perhaps. Roman sandals buried under the same soil that now clung to my boots. French muskets once fired from the same ledges where now M1 Garens lay discarded. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a theater of repetition, and we were just the newest act. Sometime around what should have been 2 or 3 in the morning, the sound returned. Not a gunshot, not movement. It was the voice. But this time, it wasn't coming from the trees, or from behind me, or from some formless point in the mist. It was inside my helmet, echoing around a metal like a whisper trapped in a cave. It said nothing new. Just the same damn phrase again, only slower this time. You left me. It wasn't Kendall's voice anymore. It was mine. I stood slowly, unsure if I even meant to. The others didn't react. They were asleep, maybe, or lost in their own waking nightmares. I took a step forward. Then another. The forest didn't resist. It opened. The trees parted like curtains, revealing a narrow trail I hadn't seen before, lined with shattered stones and scorched tree stumps. I didn't call for anyone to follow. I didn't even look back. Whatever part of me was still a leader, still a soldier, had been left behind somewhere in that clearing where the radio had died. Now I was just a man following a thread in the dark. The path curved upward, the slope tightening until my calves burned and my breath came in harsh, shallow pulls. The forest grew quieter with every step, but not in a peaceful way, more like holding a breath before a scream. And then I reached it. The summit. There was no view, no grand vista overlooking the valley below. Just a clearing the size of a barn, ringed by blackened trees that had been struck by lightning or something far worse. In the center stood what could only be described as a monument, a massive stone, weathered and cracked, shaped like a jagged spear driven into the earth. Around its base were helmets, German, American, British, all rusted, stacked neatly in concentric circles. A grave of nations. I moved closer, compelled by something I couldn't name, and as I approached the stone, I noticed it wasn't alone. Figures stood around it, still, silent, watching. I couldn't see their faces, but they wore uniforms, some familiar, some impossibly old. One looked like a Napoleonic soldier. Another wore what might have been a Wehrmacht greatcoat, though it was too faded to be certain. There were at least a dozen of them, unmoving, as though frozen in the act of witness. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask them what this place was, why we'd been drawn here, why I kept hearing that voice. But then one of them raised an arm, not fast, not threatening, just indicating. Behind the stone, half buried in the mud and leaves, was a body. Not skeletal, not decayed, fresh. It was me. At least, it looked like me. The same jacket, the same name stitched on the breast. The same boots with a rip on the left side from that mine fragment in August. Hero was lying face down motionless, one arm outstretched toward the stone, the other twisted beneath the chest in a way that suggested a sudden collapse. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind tried to reject the sight, to rationalize it as a hallucination, a trick of the brain unraveling under pressure. But my gut knew better. This place was not a place of metaphor. It was literal. What I was seeing had happened, or was happening, or would happen. Time meant nothing here. The figures around me began to hum. Not a song, not a chant, but a low vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself, passing up through my legs and into my chest. It wasn't hostile. If anything, it felt mournful. Dirge. An apology, perhaps. I dropped to my knees, the weight of the moment too much for the bones and muscle and mind of one man to bear. I touched the stone. It was warm. And then I remembered something. Not a memory exactly, but a flash. A moment I hadn't lived yet. Simmons screaming into the fog. Muller's prayer. Donnelly's face as he disappeared into the trees. I saw them all again, but this time in reverse, like a film spinning backward, ending at the start of the mission. Back to when we first entered the forest. And something deep inside me said, you can choose. Not redemption. Not escape. But understanding. I rose. The figures were gone. The clearing was empty. And behind me, the trail back down the hill had reappeared, clearer than ever, bathed in a sickly dawn light that made the trees look thinner and the fog seem less dense. I walked. Not quickly, not slowly. Just walked. I rejoined what remained of the squad at the base of the slope sometime after the sun had clawed its way through the mist. They looked at me without speaking. They knew I had seen something. And they had seen something too. We didn't talk about it. Not then. Not ever. We received orders to pull back later that day. The brass had decided the hill wasn't worth the cost. Too fortified, too exposed. They'd try a flanking route weeks later, but by then, most of us were gone. Reassigned, rotated, or simply gone. When the war ended, I returned home with the same ribbons, the same scars, and a head full of silence. I married, had a son, became a teacher, live a life. But every now and then, when the wind moves through the trees just right, when the fog rolls across the hills outside my window in the early hours of morning, I remember that stone, that clearing, that body. And I ask myself the same question every time. Did I ever come down from that hill? Or am I still there, lying face down behind that monument, reaching for something that was never meant to be found? Probably no one will ever know. Probably.